Tonight we're here to honor a man who God gave many talents. And not only is he to be honored, we're honored as being a part of this community that he loves. On July 22nd, I had the privilege of talking with Admiral Kelso, and we discussed several things, and as part of tonight's program, as a preamble, I would like to share some of that discussion of that with you. Admiral Kelso said he always thought he would come back to Fayetteville because this is his home. About special places that are here in Lincoln County that are special to him, he said one was Rose Hill Cemetery. He said, most of my folks are there. You know, we've been here a long time, nearly 200 years. First United Methodist Church, that's a special place. That's my church, you know. And the hills and fields of rural Lincoln County are special to me. My dad was a quail hunter, and I spent a lot of time as a boy with him on those fields and hills and had some wonderful times. We talked a little about characters in the Bible, and I asked him, I said, Admiral, what's your favorite Old Testament character? He said, well, I got a bunch of them. But if you narrow it down to one, probably Moses. And he didn't expound on why Moses, but let me give you a little comparative analysis. Moses, with God's help, split the waters, saved his people from the enemy, the Egyptians. A few years later, Admiral Kelso split the waters of the seven seas, defended his people against the enemy at that time, the Soviet Union. We talked about favorite presidents. He said, well, I kind of liked a bunch of them, but I said, well, what about since 1900? He said, I guess TR. And he said, but I liked FDR too. And I said, thinking about Teddy Roosevelt, his Rough Rider toughness, and I said, Admiral, are you TR tough? He said, you know, now people nowadays, and he clenched his fists up like this, and he said, most people think this is tough. I'm not that tough. And I said, well, what do you define toughness as? He said, toughness is when things get rough and you stick to your moral character. You're tough, Admiral. I asked him what was his favorite parable. He thought a little while and he said, I guess the sower, the parable of the sower. So I start talking. I said, you know, that's probably mine. And he nearly interrupts me, but not quite. And he says, but now I like the landowner and the workers too. He paused a little. He said, because I don't think anybody should tell me what to do with my money. We talked about leadership, and he defined leadership. He said, the Navy and the Marines define leadership as honor, commitment, and courage. I talked about making decisions. He said he talked to other people, got their opinions, and a lot of times he would change his plan of action by what they told him. But he always took responsibility for whatever the outcome was, whatever the decision. He shared the glory when it was a success, but he took responsibility. Tonight, we're sharing that with you, and thank you, Admiral Kelso. If you would please stand for the presentation of colors. Please be seated. Reverend Ann Hatcher from First United Methodist Church.
Good evening. Since our senior pastor, Tommy Ward, is unable to be with us tonight, Kay recalled and asked if I would make a few brief comments and say a prayer, and I'm so honored to be able to do that this evening. I've known Admiral Frank Kelso all of my life, or maybe I should say I've known of him. He has always been this larger-than-life man who my family esteemed and respected. But since the Kelsos have moved back to Fayetteville, I've gotten to know them on a much more personal level, and there are a couple of things I would like to share with you. The Kelsos are very active members of Fayetteville First United Methodist Church, and as a member of our church, Admiral Kelso exemplifies the term servant leader. And as you can imagine, he has used his God-given talents and gifts as a leader in our church. And one example of that is he has been the chair of our church council, which you could say would be our governing or administrative body of our church. But what you may not know about this man is that he also has an incredible servant's heart. And to describe that, I would tell you that he has volunteered countless hours working in our church office, doing some very administrative kinds of things, such as organizing our membership rolls and a lot of our church records. His most recent endeavor has been to pull together a new church directory for us, and I would say that those kinds of duties might be something that many of us would think are beneath a man of this stature. But he has done so diligently and without complaint. He serves his God faithfully and selflessly. And that's what I call a servant leader. And on a very personal note, when I started the journey a couple of years ago toward full-time ministry, Frank Kelso was my greatest supporter and an incredible source of encouragement for me. Frank, I appreciate your authentic service to God through the local church. And I know that Tommy would so enjoy being here with you to celebrate this evening. And I know I speak for him when I say that we respect you. We appreciate the many ways that you support us in our church. And most of all, we love you. Would you pray with me? Loving God, as we gather together this evening, we thank you for Admiral Frank Kelso and the influence he has had on our lives and the lives of countless others. We are thankful for his generous spirit, his quiet courage, and his humble service. Lord, he remains a role model for us, reminding us of the impact one person can have on this world. We thank you for his service to this country, and we salute him with honor. Holy God, we pause to ask your blessing on those assembled here tonight, on our time together as we show our respect and honor to this, your servant, in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Bud and Bill, y'all's turn. Two lifelong friends of Admiral Kelso's, Bill Askew and Bud Rambo.
Thank I guess I'm going first.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's my honor tonight to be able to speak about my friend, Frank Kelso. Frank and I have been friends from our beginning. He was my first playmate, and we lived only a few houses apart. And I loved to go play with Frank on Cherry Street. His backyard was great for cowboys and Indians, and his side yard was just right for football and baseball. And those were great times for us. Frank and I started in the first grade at Robert E. Lee together, and throughout our grade school years, most of the time we were in the same classroom. In the 7th and 8th grade, we played football on teams coached by Mr. Ralph Askins. And next, we entered the Lincoln County Central High School. Our class doubled in size as many students from the county joined us. We made new friends, and we had a wonderful class. Those were special days. Our high school days were special to us. In our junior and senior years, the Central High Tiger football team was very good. We were ranked very high in the state of Tennessee. Frank and I were privileged to be part of that team. However, Frank had found another sport that he loved, and that was golf, and he was an excellent golfer. He later would use those abilities to play at the Naval Academy for 4 years. In his last year, he was chosen as captain of that golf team. In high school, Frank was an excellent student and one of our class leaders. He was a wonderful buddy, grounded in honesty, faithfulness, and respect for others. After graduation, we all went our separate ways in search of our future. Frank went to Swanee for 1 year and then on to the Naval Academy. We kept in touch but only saw each other every few years. And after his graduation from the academy, we followed his career in the Navy with interest and pride. Tonight, I'm also representing our high school class, the class of 1951. Many of our class are here tonight to participate in this celebration, and I would ask them, if they don't mind, please standing, where I thank Frank. Thank you. Frank, there are 2 classmates that were not able to be here tonight because of health issues, but they wanted me to make sure that you knew that they were here in spirit, and that's Alice Parks and Billy Billings. Frank has always kept his ties with our class. He made as many reunions as he possibly could, and he was always been sincerely interested in the lives of his classmates and their families. During his busy years, Frank never forgot his roots. Frank Kelso is a class of 51 shining star, and we're all so proud of him and his wonderful Navy career. I told Carolyn I was going to try to keep my composure, but Carolyn and my wife and I were fortunate to attend several Navy functions at the invitation of Frank and Landis. We had the privilege to attend the commissioning of the aircraft carrier USS Teddy Roosevelt at Norfolk, Virginia, as guests of Admiral Kelso. Commissioning is when the Navy accepts the vessel from the manufacturing contractor. All the crewmen are on board and ready to man their stations. When Frank, Landis, Carolyn, and I went aboard, walking on the red carpet, Admiral Kelso leading the way, we passed a multitude of crewmen standing at attention on either side. I watched as Frank would pause and speak to individuals that he recognized, calling them by name. And I observed the pride and adoration on the faces at his recognition and acknowledgement of them. This ceremony was under Frank's command, which meant he had a great deal of responsibility. There were many high-ranking people in attendance there, such as the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Navy, John Lehman, Director of CIA, Bill Casey, and a host of Navy brass. But even with all of his responsibilities, Frank still had the strong sense of respect for those he knew and had served with, and took the time to acknowledge them. I thought to myself, Frank is still that same person that has a sincere interest and respect for others. It's a scene I'll never forget. If you've ever gone anywhere with Frank Kelso, you know you're going to get there early for the event. So Landis, Carolyn, and I were among the first to arrive and be seated in a VIP section, which was close to the speaker's platform, and Frank was on the platform. This was outside on the lower deck of the aircraft carrier, and a light rain began to fall, and Frank's aide took him his raincoat, and Frank refused it, and then she returned and offered it to me, so I slipped on the raincoat. And it had the 4 stars shining on each shoulder. And this was a festive time for the officers and their wives as they arrived, and everybody was greeting and speaking to their associates. When they came to me, they were confused. Seeing the 4 stars but not recognizing the face. They would look at me and then look away, look at me and look away. I almost caused a traffic jam there in the VIP section. To say the least, it was a very interesting experience. An aircraft carrier is a huge ship, housing over 6,000 crewmen. It's like a small city. In the closing moments of that commissioning ceremony, the Navy brings the ship alive. The crew rush to their stations, turning on every light, blowing every horn, operating every automated door, checking each system. And this all happens almost at once. It's a very exciting and impressive ceremony. I must say a few words about his beloved Landis. She certainly fulfills that expression that behind every good man, there's a good woman. She's been with him every step of the way. Frank has often told me that he would not have been able to succeed without her. When he was at sea, she had the sole responsibility of taking care of the home and 4 children. They were and are a wonderful team. When the Kelsos decided to return to Fayetteville, we were all so excited. Now we'd have time to spend much more time together and enjoying our friendship. However, another blessing from the move was that we were able to spend time with his children and their families. And I can tell you, the Kelsos have a wonderful, wonderful family. In looking back, it's not difficult for me to understand why Frank had such a successful career. Frank is a man of integrity, fairness, compassion, with respect for others, and with a strong faith in his God. Combine these qualities with a deep commitment to his country and hard work, and you have the requirements for success. In closing, I'd like to remind you that Frank Kelso is a giver. He gives of his time, his resources, to his family, to his friends, to his community, to his country, and to his God. And while doing this, he is such an humble person in all his actions. Life has been a journey, and so is our friendship, that is stronger today than ever. I often thank God for my true friend, Frank Kelso. Frank and Landis, we love you.
I have to wear these. Frank and I grew up together. He's about a year and a half older than I am, and he lived on Cherry Street with his mother, Wista, his father, Benton, and lived there for quite a while. I lived up on Green Street. Billy lived between us. He was in between us there. But I lived with my mother, Lois, my father, Bennett, my sister, Betsy. And we were real close. His mother and daddy and my mother and daddy were so close that just about every Friday and Saturday night, we'd have dinner together. And sometimes we'd go all the way up to Crystal Springs, where Frank's family had a cabin. And we'd go swimming in the cold water of Crystal Springs, have dinner, and we'd play games. And these were all good times. Frank had an uncle by the name of Paul Muse. Paul was serving in the Pacific during World War II with the Navy. I would go down to Frank's, we were little bitty boys, and we would play war. And every time Paul's name would come up. Now, I don't know whether that had anything to do with Frank going into the Navy, but I do know this. He really thought a lot of his uncle. You know, Frank and myself, we took trips with the family and had good times. One trip we went to Fort Walton. Now Fort Walton was a place at this time that didn't have the big high rises, it didn't have the motels. Destin was nothing but a fishing village. But we stayed at a hotel there called Staff's Hotel. And to go swimming, you had to go, they didn't have anything on the beach, they just had a place on the beach for you to go. So they carried us out to the beach. Frank and myself, we got out there and we had so much fun, we made them stay all day. Well, you know what happened. We got blistered. I mean, we got blistered bad. But Frank got it worse than I did. Frank's blister was of water blisters on his shoulder and his back. He could lean over this way and it would come here. And he'd go back this way, it'd go back that way. We had such a bad night that the next morning we had to get up and come home. A year or so after that, Miss Wista and my mother decided they'd take Betsy and her friend, June Posey, and Frank and myself back down there. But you can rest assured, we watched out. We didn't get sunburned this time. Frank and myself, we also, like Billy said, we loved all the sports. Now, we would play in Frank's side yard there, but the big game was up in Mr. Deemer Lamb's front yard. And we had some big football games up there. We'd also play tennis and basketball over in Joe Fason's backyard. We loved to play golf, and we learned how to play golf at the country club here. we were instructed by John Reese and James Reese. And our bunch that we played with when we had a chance to play was Frank, myself, Joe Faison, Jack Goodrich, Don Holman, and Jack Wilkes, Larry, and Charles Robertson. Now, the days we couldn't play golf, we would caddy. And we'd caddy for Dr. Landis, Lawson Myers, James and Ernest Reese, Dr. Crawford, and others. Joe, Frank, and I would make the tournament circuit in the summertime with the Tennessee Golf Association. Now, Frank and Joe were good. I just tagged along. Frank went on to graduate from Naval Academy at the top of his class. Frank was eventually in with the subfleet. Well, on one of his missions, Frank took time to sit down and write Catherine and myself a letter. And just guess where the postmark was from? The North Pole. Now I want to tell you how fortunate we are to have Frank and Landis with us. And after I tell you how we got them here, you will agree the Lord meant for Frank and Landis to live in Fayetteville. Billy and Carolyn, Catherine and I, we looked all over this place for quite a while, trying to find a suitable place for Frank and them to come and live. In fact, Frank came down, and Landis, they came down and looked too, I think. But we couldn't find anything. Catherine and I went on a trip to Florida and came back. And when we got back, our good neighbor and friend, Dr. Sarah Light, which was our neighbor, called Catherine and told her, said, "Catherine, I didn't want to do anything until I talked to y'all, because y'all are such good friends. But I have decided to sell my house and move back to Alabama." Well, Catherine told her, said, we think we've got somebody that would like to look at it, but the one thing we didn't do was tell Sarah that we wanted to hold it until Frank could get down here. Well, we went home that afternoon, we called Frank and Landis, and they said, and this was on a Friday or a Saturday, I don't remember which, that they had to get down here and look at this place. And Frank said, "Well, I can't get there before Tuesday." And he said, "Okay." So we go back to see Sarah. Sarah has already put the sign out. She's already got a buyer for our house. And I have to go around and call Frank back and tell him the house is gone. We're not going to be able to come down here. Well, we go to church on Sunday morning. Catherine and Sarah are going to a play that afternoon. I was going to go play golf. And on the way to Huntsville, Sarah looks over at Catherine and said, "The sale fell through." And Catherine said, "Sarah, don't you put that house back on the market. You hold it until we can get Frank back down here." Well, Catherine knew that I was playing golf. She couldn't get me. So she picks up the telephone, calls Betsy, who knows nothing about any of this, and tells Betsy to call Frank and tell him to be here Tuesday. No, didn't tell him anything, just be here Tuesday. Well, I come in from playing golf, don't know anything of this that happened. The telephone's ringing. I answer the phone, and it's Frank. And you know what he told me? He said, "Rambo, what in the hell is going on down there?" I told him, I said, "I don't know, Frank, but when Catherine gets here, I'll have her call you." So we did. We called, and he agreed to come, and he did come on Tuesday. They stayed with Billy and Carolyn, and came over and looked at the house, and liked it, and they bought it. Well, you can see that the Lord had something to do with this. He made this house available for Frank and Landis. And I believe that to the bottom of my heart right now. And I think Frank does too. But we're so glad to have them there. I want to finish with reading a little thing here. It's the mission of the U.S. Naval Academy to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, to imbue them with the highest ideas of duty, honor, and loyalty, in order to graduate leaders who are dedicated to a career of Navy service and who have potential for future development in mind and character to assume the highest responsibilities of command, citizenship, and government. Frank, I'm going to get a little sentimental here too. Frank, you have excelled in all of them. Frank, you and Landis, Catherine and I want you to know how much we love you, and so honored to have you as a friend and a next-door neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill and Bud. Rear Admiral Jerry Brest was born and raised in Shelbyville, Tennessee. Went to Vanderbilt University, graduated there with a degree in physics, and received his Naval ROTC commission in 1958. Went to Naval Flight School. After receiving his Wings of Gold, he flew 336 combat missions over North Vietnam. He was the commanding officer of the USS Savannah, also the aircraft carrier Independence, and he was assigned the director of operations of the U.S. Space Command, and in 1987 was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral. Please make welcome Rear Admiral Jerry Brest.
Mr. Newman and Representative Marsh, and all you great folks from Lincoln County, it's good to be here. It is really feels like you're coming home to dear hearts and gentle people when you come home to Middle Tennessee. I got a couple of things to say. This is not my first rodeo in Fayetteville. I went to Dunroman when I was 9, 10, and 11 years old. The Garishes were there. I don't know whether there's any of that family still around, but I was very homesick, but after that, it was a great experience. In the early 1990s, I came over and helped you dedicate the Vietnam Memorial, I think, on the courthouse yard. So I feel like I've got a little bit of stake in Fayetteville as well. But first, I need to clear up a couple of things. The program reads that I am here as an admiral to celebrate the life and accomplishment of Admiral Kelso. You folks have got to know that I am a rear admiral. That means I only wear 2 stars as opposed to 4 that the big guy over here has. There's about as much difference between a 2-star admiral and a 4-star as there is between a mule and a walking horse. Well, let me give you an example of that. In Shelbyville, they just dedicated a strip of the Lewisburg Highway to me. Here in Fayetteville, you guys have already named a town for Kelso's. And it's got a rum distillery in it. And the best thing on my strip of road in Shelbyville is a deserted dairy barn. Now, there's also a big difference in aviators and in submariners. Aviators are all about big noises and flashy flyovers and bombs going off. Admiral Kelso is a submariner, and they run silent and run deep. For instance, we aviators took lots of pictures out of cockpits to document our heroics. Admiral Kelso's submariners just kept sending us pictures of our aircraft carriers taken from their submerged periscopes and labeled them in great words, targets. That's a favorite hobby of submariners, is to let us know that we're very vulnerable. I first met Admiral Kelso in the fall of 1985 when my Coral Sea Task Group chopped into the Mediterranean Sea. At that time, Frank was the commander of the Sixth Fleet as a 3-star and sitting, as far as I was concerned, on the right hand of God. During that first few months in the Mediterranean, he and the Saratoga Battle Group were doing some pretty significant things, like forcing down the hijackers of the Achille Lauro and capturing them in Sigonella, an airbase in Sicily. That evolution was largely a C-cubed operation. That means it was primarily a command and control event, where information was processed and decisions were made and effective action was taken. Pay attention here, because this begins a series of events that took place in the Sixth Fleet and in which the units did some things which under other commanders might not have gone as smoothly. In fairness, the President Reagan, and the National Command Authority get a little credit too, because they did a great job of telling the European Command and subsequently Admiral Kelso what they wanted done. It was up to us to figure out how to do it. After a number of terrorist bombings in the European theater, it became evident that the U.S. would likely take some action against the source of those deadly events. There was little doubt that training shelter and explosives were coming from Libya. Consequently, we began to get heavy message tasking from the White House War Room down through the Sixth Fleet headquarters to plan certain targets that were hosting terrorists in Libya. It was fascinating to watch Admiral Kelso from afar, quietly and patiently control what his ships and planes were planning to do. I was very impressed. Here was a 3-star submariner who knew as much about my aircraft as I did. And I still don't know nothing about submarines, let me tell you. The Admiral would come aboard Coral Sea and gather my pilots together and discuss rules of engagement with them. He wasn't just instructing them, he was helping them to understand why these limits were placed on their operations. Do you folks understand rules of engagement? Most warriors don't love rules of engagement very much because it means there are complicated sets of criteria through which you must step before you shoot. It's sort of like checking the type of feathers an Indian is wearing just before you duck his tomahawk. It is not a cool thing. Generally, they are not popular. Rules of engagement are not. Frank made darn sure that we, our pilots, understood the reasons behind them and how to take ultimate action. Without describing all the excitement of those 7 months in the Mediterranean, let me just say we did some great things and spanked Colonel Gaddafi pretty hard. Throughout, it was the steady hand of the boss and his awareness of the battles that made the men of the Sixth Fleet successful. I will always be grateful for his leadership and friendship. After his success in the Med, he was promoted and given command of the Atlantic Fleet. They call that Cinque Fleet. During this tour, he and Landis were privileged to oversee the launching and commissioning of the USS Tennessee, a ballistic missile submarine and the 6th ship to be named for our state. I noticed that out in the museum there are a couple of great displays of the Tennessee and that christening. She's a ballistic missile submarine. She's the 6th ship to be named for our state. And one of my golfing buddies in Nashville is retired Captain Dennis Witzenberg, who was the first skipper of the Tennessee. Dennis and his wife, Charlotte, send their best wishes and their fondest regards to both you, Admiral, and Landis, and they wanted you to know how much they remember Landis's mother as well. She apparently made a real impression, Landis. And Landis, of course, is the lady that broke the bottle across the bow. And by the way, that bottle and its sterling silver container are also in your museum. I have another golfing partner, and you are correct that I do get out on the golf courses quite often. He is also a retired Navy captain by the name of Mark Rogers. Listen, please, while I read what he wrote to me. I did not work directly for Admiral Kelso, but he did make a surprise visit to my frigate when I was the commanding officer. My ship had won the Battenberg Award as the best ship in the Atlantic Fleet, and Admiral Kelso flew in and presented the cup to my crew. Then in 1993, after being the CO of a cruiser, I was stationed in the White House, and he presented me with the Navy League John Paul Jones Leadership Award. By the way, this officer won 5 leadership awards, so there was something there other than just a political smile. He was the Chief of Naval Operations then, and I thought that he was the warmest admiral I had ever known. My wife and I were amazed that he was such a dominant leader and yet so gentle and kind. By the way, Captain Rogers has since decided that I am also kind and gentle and generous in that I lose money to him consistently on the dock. Anyway, I hope you begin to note that your fellow townsman was a hell of a naval officer. It takes quite a man to teach, to tolerate, to lead, and be kind and gentle and warm. When he spent a number of years peering through a periscope and computing targets. I suspect we're talking good genes, a loving family, and a community environment to make such a man, just like these friends have shown you. One last tale. Around the 1st of May, 1986, as my Coral Sea battle group had been relieved in the Med and was heading west through Gibraltar, the red phone, which is a classified phone that you can speak freely over, the red phone rang in my war room. It was a call from Admiral Kelso on the secure phone. He said, "Jerry, I just wanted to say goodbye and to tell you that you fellas did a great job over here." I said, "Admiral, thank you very much for that, and I've done a little bit of research. Did you realize that in the annals of naval warfare, this is the first time that anyone from Shelbyville has ever effectively taken orders from someone from Fayetteville?" Thank you, Admiral Kelso. It's been an honor to participate in this forum, and it was a consummate pleasure to serve with and under your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Rear Admiral. At this time, with some assistance with a microphone, I think it's time for our guest of honor to have a few words. Do you want us to set this down on the floor there, Admiral Kelso? Is that
Yes,
the plan?
that's a plan.
Randy, if you would.
Your mom said a lot about me, but I can't do that.
Okay. It's kind of quiet.
All right. Yep. Can you hear me all right? Well, I want to give you an A+ on putting on a pretty good funeral here. I'd like you to remember it and repeat it and yell a little louder so the Lord will hear too. Will you? But I really didn't write anything to say tonight, because whatever I say, I want you to know it comes right from my heart. And Bill, I appreciate your words, and ask you and Bud and Jerry, thank you so much for being here and those kind words. Jerry was the air leader for the raid on Libya, and everything came out really well. It was his great leadership. First, I'd like to say thank you for each of you that have come here tonight. Most of you I know, and some I've learned to get to know tonight, and I'm so appreciative of this event and your kind regards for me. I'd like to say that whatever I've accomplished in life, I share with my wife. Landis has been with me through thick and thin, and good times and bad, and there weren't too many bad ones. She's always kept my hat size the same. No, and the stars never bothered her a bit. And I was always grateful for that. They're coming to get me. I'm going to tell you a story. The story probably won't make much sense to you for a while, but I hope in the end it will. Bill, I think, or Bud did it. Bud did that. You got a letter from me from the North Pole. When I was a young commander, I was commanding officer of a submarine called a Bluefish, and we got orders to go to the North Pole. Well, the North Pole is not your next door neighbor, it's a long way off, and the navigation problem to get there and to get back is pretty interesting, to say the least. And we were going to take a route coming home through that part of the world between two large land masses, maybe 20 or 30 miles of good water between them, and about 700 miles of ice above us where we would never be able to surface. And when you need some help navigating for one of those trips, and we have a machine on submarines called inertial navigators. And we had a nice inertial navigator. We had a great guy who used to operate it, but he decided to retire from the Navy. So I called up the Navy and I said, hey, I need a technician to operate this inertial navigator, because I didn't know a damn thing about it. And they said, well, we'll send you a next guy out of school. I said, no, I'd like to have an experienced guy. We're going to the North Pole. Well, we'll look and see, So, it's about a month before we're supposed to leave, and this young kid shows up. He's about that high. For those of you that don't know Army and Air Force ranks, he wasn't even a sergeant yet. He'd never been on a ship before, and he was going to get us to the North Pole and back. Every once in a while it takes a lot of courage to be a submariner, We do some things other than look for targets. And so this young kid comes on board, and I talked to him, and I said, he said, don't worry, Captain, I learned a lot in school. We'll know how to do this. And he did. We went several thousand miles under the ice, back down through the iceberg country, and never hit anything or the bottom or anything else, and we knew where we were the whole way. And I got back and I got all kind of accolades. It probably set my reputation in the Navy for years to come. But I always knew in the back of my mind that the only reason I was able to be so good was because of that young kid who knew what he was doing and did it for me. So when you invite me to a gathering like this, that's what goes through my mind. How many young people, how many people I've known all my life that made my life possible. I didn't do much of it. They all did it for me. I started out here, and I've always loved it here. I can name all those people that taught me from first grade on just about. And they were wonderful. My parents, my friends. Can't have much better friends than Askew and Rambo. You know, we were together a long time. And I have a lot of friends in a lot of places, but there's something about your heart, you know, that tells you where home is. And this place was always home to me. I guess I always thought I'd come back. Had a little trouble with Landis sometimes. I told her once we all wanted to go back to Fayetteville, and she says, well, it's awful small, Frank. And I said, she said, you know, it doesn't even have a picture show. And I says, hell, we don't go to the picture show. And she says, well, you know, if I wanted to, I'd like to know I could. So you got a picture show, we came back, you know. But it just feels like home. You're the kind of people I love. You seem to love me. And I feel comfortable here. And I think Landis would tell you she feels pretty comfortable here too. I know that you'll take care of me if you need to, and I hope you don't. I hope I can help you if I can. And it's just a place, there ain't any other like it. I've been a lot of places and seen a lot of places, and I didn't lose anything there, but I did here. So I'm back to stay, and God bless all of you for being with us tonight. It's really a great pleasure for me to be honored like this, and I guess I'll blow it if I say much more, but God bless all of you, and thank you so much.
Will Harbin graduated this year from Lincoln County High. He was the 2010 recipient of the Admiral Kelso Scholarship. We're very proud of him, and just like Admiral Kelso said, we're looking after our youth. Will, it's all yours.
Well, it's hard to follow something like that in Admiral Kelso's kind words. What a privilege it is to be here with you tonight as we do join together to celebrate Admiral Kelso's years of service to our country. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the Admiral for all that he has done for our nation, our community, and our lives. It is through him and his comrades that we are able to live in freedom. So thank you, Admiral Kelso, for everything you have done, everything you will continue to do so that we may enjoy our freedoms. Your service and your dedication is truly an inspiration and encouragement to me, and I know to many others in this room as well. A proud graduate of the Lincoln County High School class of 2010, I am currently a student at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where I'm majoring in meteorology and working to establish a career with either a private contractor or the U.S. government. But without hard work, without prayers, and the generous donations that fund scholarships such as the Kelso Scholarship, I would not be able to be there and seeking to do something that I love. Founded in 1986 in conjunction with a Day of Appreciation held by both the city and the county during Admiral Kelso's homecoming, the Kelso Scholarship awards a one-time $500 award to a graduating senior from Lincoln County High School each year. The winning student is selected by a combined panel of teachers and school administrators who carefully review each application. As the newly formed scholarship program began to take shape, donations flowed in to honor Admiral Kelso. However, in recent years, funding for the scholarship has been provided greatly by his classmates, some of who are here tonight from the Central High School class of 1951. So tonight, I encourage you to follow Admiral Kelso's example of steadfastness and hope in order to complete a mission with successful results. I challenge you to make a contribution to the Kelso Scholarship, whether it is 1, whether it is 10, or even a $100 donation. Every dollar makes a difference in a person's academic career. In my case, this scholarship has helped to yield the burdens of classes, which some cost $350 each, textbooks almost $500, and traveling expenses, which add up weekly. I am grateful for the gifts I have received from this scholarship, from other scholarships, and am fortunate to have a caring community such as you that is willing to provide for their own. So if you would like to stand out and make a donation to the Kelso Scholarship to provide hope and a way for other high school seniors to achieve their college ambitions without worrying about financing, you may do so either by mail or with the envelopes that are placed on your table tonight. Your contribution can and will make a difference in a student's education, but only if funds are available to keep this wonderful program running and helping others. I'd like to thank the Chamber again for their invitation to be here with you tonight, and to Admiral Kelso once again for your stunning career.
Thank you, Will. Now we will have a presentation. I'm turning the program over to Carrie Sullivan and Lucy Carter.
As the Chamber President, I just want to once again thank each and every one of y'all for being here. But I am so grateful to you, Landis, for coming back to Lincoln County. Even though you might have thought it was small, you have a wonderful heart, and we thank you for that. And to the Admiral, there aren't words to describe what you've meant to our country and to our community. And I'm sure everyone in this room and those that aren't here tonight, thank you too for what you have done. And Lucy, if you will join me, we have a small token for Admiral. This is Lucy Carter, which most of you all know as Lucy Carter, the editor of Elk Valley Times. Some of you may not know her best-kept secret. Lucy is a fine artist. And Admiral, if you'll come to the end of the stage, Lucy has done a print of the clock of the courthouse and its steeple, and we are presenting tonight the Admiral with the first print. Now we'll turn it back over to Bill Newman, and thanks again for being here.
Admiral Kelso, there were a few that could not be here tonight, but sent letters of appreciation. Senator Lamar Alexander, Governor Bredesen, and former President Bill Clinton, and we'll get you those. Great warriors can be our best peacemakers. Peacemakers are heroes. Peace comes from our Creator. So I challenge all of you to start becoming a hero through honor, commitment, and courage. And I challenge you to find those places, whether they're local or somewhere where your home is, that you get a special connectedness when you visit those. Or you can look back on the past, do something in the present, and look forward to the future. Please invest in our youth. Choose your ways that you do, but I hope one of the ways will be your contributions to the Admiral Kelso Scholarship. Thank you for your presence tonight. It's very much appreciated. And to you, Admiral Kelso, we hope tonight will dwell in your memories, and when you think about home, you just smile a little more every time that you do. Thank y'all for being here tonight, and good night.